We are very honored to have our first speaker, Lord Nazir Ahmad. Lord Nazir Ahmad is a member of the House of Lords in British Parliament, and he has a long career, but I'm going to highlight a couple of things. Lord Ahmad began his political career as a local Labour Party councillor in 1990, becoming chair of the South Yorkshire Labour Party in 1993, and served at both positions until 2000. And there are much more Lord Nazir is doing in British Parliament. He is a strong advocate of the Rohingya cause. Inshallah, Lord Nazir will give his perspective how they have been active on Rohingya issue in the UK. Thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dr. Waqaruddin, a very distinguished panel of speakers, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Let me first of all say thank you to ISNA for organizing this meeting this afternoon. I had prepared some notes to speak on very similar issues which you heard the moving testimonies, and of course Brother Waqaruddin, who has given us detail of the genocide that is taking place. I'm afraid I'm the least qualified out of the panel because Honorable Thomas Andrews, who is working not only in Washington DC but around the world. And I can tell you that last week I was in Korea, in Seoul, and there was a conference on peace and development, and a monk from Sri Lanka, who was the chancellor of university where monks are trained, made a very good speech in relation to this peaceful religion of Buddhism. And he said that Buddhism is the most peaceful religion in the world. And of course, a lot of what he said, I think all the religions generally share in terms of values and in terms of their beliefs. And then when he finished and there was opportunity to ask questions, I was the first one to raise my hand, and I said, "Sir, could you please explain to me? I always thought that Buddhism is a very peaceful religion. Everybody in the world thinks Buddhism is the most peaceful. In fact, they don't say that about Islam or Christianity, but they say about Buddhism." And I said that I went to Sri Lanka and I saw BBS, those Buddhist monks burning down houses and buildings and businesses of Muslims. And then you have 969, and Thomas was telling me that they've changed their name now. The Buddhist monks who've been involved with rape, burning down houses, and burning down mosques, and of course driving communities out of their houses. How does that compare with what you just said? And he was very diplomatic. He sort of, first of all, said, "You know, you are from England, I studied there, it's a great country," just to calm me down. But he was very clever. Then he turned it around and he said, "You know, Islam is a peaceful religion, and you've got ISIS. And, you know, we also have 5% of our 95% is very peaceful." But what I said back was that ISIS is not made of muftis and imams. Yours are Buddhist monks who are doing this. And that's the difference. But I also, and there's no justification for ISIS by me, because I did try to explain that ISIS has nothing to do with Islam. These are former socialist Saddam Hussein's Baathists who were driven out because we had sort of dismantled the state. And we dismantled the soldiers and their administration and sent them back. We didn't give them a penny, we didn't give them anything. And they were pushed back, and the new government, which was led from Najaf and Maliki's government, that pushed them so economically, and no justification what they're doing. but that gave them a cause to fight. And the only thing that could unite them was not socialism or Baathism, but it was about Islam. It was Islam that actually united them, at least in my understanding. But today, what you see both in Burma and in Sri Lanka is that these monks that have been doing this. Houses that are burned down, and of course you must have visited the 2 stalls here at the convention center, and those pictures of innocent people that have been burned down. And of course British newspapers have said that Rohingya community is the most persecuted community in the world. And I totally agree with Dr. Waqaruddin that this regime is the modern fascists, the Nazis. They're using exactly the same tactics. And if you look, I mean, 2.5 years ago, when I actually saw these pictures, immediately we organized a meeting with the ambassador of Burma, Myanmar, and we went to see him with a delegation of politicians, Muslim politicians in the British Parliament, as well as one brother who is from Burma. And we went to see him, and of course he tried to justify. And then he gave us this excuse, and he said, well, you know, most of these people are not from Burma. They are new people they are Bangladeshi citizens who have come after 1971 and who are actually still coming in because they are economic migrants. And then I check up. Then I actually done some research, and Muslims have been in Burma when Minso in 1430 of the kingdom of Maruk, after 24 years of him being deposed, he stayed in Bengal. And then he regained control of the Arkanese throne in 1430 with military assistance from the Bengal Sultanate. So Muslims came along from Bengal 1430. And so going back hundreds of years of these communities that have been there. But more importantly, British, when we actually took over this piece of land, as we've done in the past, we've taken some people with us who could produce some products so we can make money, but also so keep our soldiers over there. Going back over 100 years, in 1826, there was, that's when the British took over, and then they took farmers, laborers from this part of the world. But really, the problem actually started, as I see it, is since this military regime took over. And because they deprived democracy, they wanted to divert all their problems and blame the Muslims. Like the Nazis did, blaming the Jewish communities in Europe. They have done exactly the same, and they are sort of running a similar type of laws and rules. You've heard about the deprivation of their citizenship, deprivation of their rights, the new green card, no right to vote, no right to stand for elections. From 1946 to 1962, Rohingya members of parliament, but in fact, they were members in the government too as ministers. And today, even the great democratic leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, the one that we celebrate around the world, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, she does not mention Rohingya community. That's a shame. That's a shame, and we should say it as well. So whilst they, you know, the regime talks about the whole thing started from the gold shop, the arguments there, then they talk about this rape allegedly, and then actually, like Brother Waqar said, and all the speakers will tell you, this was designed, this was done deliberately, and deprivation of their citizenship, their rights, and actually I have no idea what their plans are really, because the problem with this situation is that sadly nobody wants the Rohingya communities anywhere. And that's why you saw over 2,700 people perished in the sea and nobody wanted them and been thrown into the sea, in deep seawater. So I think there are other speakers, and I really didn't want to take time, but I think that there are a number of things that we can demand from our parliamentarians. Yes, I congratulate the Congress for the fantastic resolution, and I hope that the Senate will also pass something. We have an all-party parliamentary group with Baroness Kinnock, who's a great woman, wife of former leader of the Labour Party, Neil Kinnock, and she was a minister in Labour government as well. She's a strong advocate and also chairman of the all-party parliamentary group, which supports the Rohingya community. We don't have a similar system, but at least this APPG is doing quite a lot of work. But I think together we should be demanding that this regime ends its policies and practices of genocide and restores full and equal citizenship rights to Rohingya communities. We should demand that they institute the right of return of all the displaced people. And we should also demand that they provide protection for the vulnerable and for all the communities, including Rohingya community. And then that they should actively promote reconciliation between communities, because they're the ones who've actually created this hatred between Muslims and non-Muslims. But can I say, we can demand these things unless we demand that the international community should put sanctions on this regime. It's not going to happen. So let's demand that there should be sanctions put on this Burmese government until they give rights and protection to the innocent and forced people of Burma, the Rohingya communities. So I've just come to show my solidarity with yourself, and anything that we can do, inshallah, we will be supporting you from London and from Europe. Thank you very much.
Now I call upon our second distinguished speaker, Honorable Tom Andrews. Honorable Tom Andrews is the President and the Chief Executive Officer of the United to End Genocide, based in Washington, D.C., in the United States. Congressman, Honorable Tom Andrews is a former congressman from the state of Maine, and he has most recently served as the National Director of Win Without War, a coalition of the 40 national organizations promoting a more progressive national security strategy that calls for prudent use of military engagement. He has worked to promote democracy and human rights throughout the world. Honorable Tom Andrews is a strong advocate of Rohingya people. He has fought for Rohingya in the Capitol Hill, testified with me many times in the Congress hearings, and he was actively engaged in Resolution 418 and pursuing right now for more resolutions from U.S. Senate, as well as more resolution from U.S. House of Representatives. Honorable Tom Andrews has visited Arakan, visited many parts of Burma. He has personally witnessed how these people are suffering. And I call upon Honorable Tom Andrews to provide his perspective and his experience and his views and visions about Rohingya policy. Please welcome Honorable Tom Andrews.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dean, and thank you very much, everyone. I brought my watch with me because, as I told the group in the last ISNA conference that I had the honored to participate in. I confess that I was a recovering politician. Since the last ISNA conference at which I spoke, I wish I could come today and tell you that conditions have improved, but as you've heard so poignantly and powerfully today, and as we've seen in the news over the last year, things have deteriorated. They've gotten even worse. And as we've heard, the rights of the Rohingya have been systematically abolished, denied, and campaigns of hatred and bigotry, systematic campaigns, well-financed campaigns, stirring up fear and hatred among the people of Burma, about Muslims, the Muslim community in general, and the Rohingya in particular. They've never been more powerful, well-financed, and sophisticated. There are elements of hope, and the hope resides in our minds, in our hearts, and in compassion, a fundamental ingredient of the values of Islam. And we've been able to see those three combined with action. Last year I asked everyone who was participating to please support H.R. 418, a resolution before the House of Representatives that brought this crisis directly to the floor of the House and called upon not only the government of Myanmar to change its policies and reverse direction from the systematic persecution, but called on the government of the United States to take a stronger stand on behalf of the Rohingya. It passed overwhelmingly. And one of the most powerful moments of that debate was the fact that they took, since I've been here last, I've been up into the camps visiting Rohingya 3 times, 3 different trips. And I took photographs of what I saw because it would be unbelievable, I thought, to just simply try to describe what I was seeing. So I took these photographs and I brought them to the halls of Congress. And leaders of both the Democratic and Republican Party said, when we go to the floor to talk about the Rohingya, we want your photographs on the floor with us, showing the Rohingya people. We want to tell the stories of the suffering that is going on in that part of the world. And so the head and the hearts, the compassion, was appealed to of members of Congress and the American public. And just as we saw in the horrible tragedy going on in Syria and in Europe just 2 days ago, that photograph of a 3-year-old Syrian that was on a beach, face down, drowned, trying to save himself and his father trying to save his family, has turned around the intransigence of so many governments to not accept and not support those who are seeking salvation. The head and the heart, very, very powerful. I went into the camps, as I mentioned 3 times. One of my trips, I brought a group of ASEAN parliamentarians from Indonesia and from Malaysia and from Cambodia and nations around ASEAN. And I said, I want you to see for yourself what it is we're talking about. Because ASEAN, in addition to the United States, is in a position of incredible influence on the government of Myanmar, and you must act in ways that you haven't acted before. So we issued a report which I have brought today, and this report was put before the ASEAN Summit of Prime Ministers in Kuala Lumpur in the spring, and was delivered to each Prime Minister that was attending that summit. These parliamentarians had a news conference that was widely covered throughout the region. The New York Times, the Washington Post, it was covered in Burma. And for the first time, the ASEAN prime ministers decided that the principle of non-interference, which is such a core principle of the way ASEAN works, was no longer adequate. The foreign minister of Malaysia announced in a news conference opening up that summit, he said, ladies and gentlemen, the principle of non-interference is no longer adequate when we see the crisis of the Rohingya before our very eyes. Burma, of course, the government of Myanmar characteristically responded by denial. They said that there are no Rohingya on those boats, and they're certainly not from our country. Of course, the president of Myanmar says there are no Rohingya in my country. Continues to publicly say this. And then the other governments in the ASEAN countries that were on that, surrounding those poor, desperate people, instead of mounting a major search and rescue operation, deploying navies to rescue these families, they deployed their navies to tie the boats up and pull them farther out to sea, so they wouldn't have responsibility for those desperate asylum seekers and refugees. This, ladies and gentlemen, is outrageous and unacceptable, and should be unacceptable to every human being on this planet. What an outrage! But the world saw it. The world saw it. And from that recognition, the heads, the hearts of some were raised, and finally there was some action. Now, as I said, there is a long, long way to go. There are elements of hope, but the challenge is immense. H.R. 418 passed in the House of Representatives, but those of you who are from this country and helped us to pass 418, we need you to help us to pass a similar similar resolution in the United States Senate that is now being developed. Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey is spearheading that effort. We need to generate support. The Senate has to hear from us, number one. Number two, I was so pleased when the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who leads the Senate, and has been a strong advocate of Aung San Suu Kyi and the reforms and the positive steps that were taken when Aung San Suu Kyi went from house arrest into Parliament. But he took to the floor a few months ago and he said that he was very disturbed by developments in Burma today. And he says that it's about time for the United States to start reconsidering its relationship with this country and start considering potential sources of economic pressure on that government. We need to support that kind of talk coming from the United States Senate. And President Obama. When President Obama lifted the economic pressure on the government of Burma that led to the reforms that were celebrated a few years ago, he said that he would retain the authority to put individual sanctions on individuals who are responsible for human rights violations. He would put people on a list, on a special designated nationals list, that would provide penalties for them and their families. Economic bite, in other words. And we have to tell President Obama that the pressure needs to start now to defend the people in all over the world. Now, to tell you that we are in the midst right now of a very dangerous situation. The United Nations, UNHCR, issued a report just a few days ago that said that there is a grave danger of that boat crisis breaking out once again. With the combination of the continued deteriorating conditions in Rakhine State in Burma, in the camps, the combination of those deteriorating conditions, the blocking of aid going to so many desperate people, and the end of the rainy season, and therefore the possibility of human traffickers enticing more people out to sea is great. So we could be seeing, according to the United Nations, a new wave of refugees and asylum seekers in the dangerous waters once again. We also know that there is an election coming up, a national election in Myanmar in November. So we have a very important job to do. As Americans, as humans, it is time for us in this period of danger to speak truth to power, to rise up with our heads, our hearts, and our activism to change the course of history. In big ways and small. You know, when I had lunch after we had the session 1 year ago at ISNA, and I asked one of the distinguished speakers, I said, what would be the single most important thing for President Obama to do when he visits Burma in November, which is last year? And he looked at me and he said, if he just said the name Rohingya when he was in Burma, because the government is putting all kinds of pressure on governments that do business with Burma to not say the name. And so no one's saying their name. They said even Secretary Kerry never mentioned their name when he went to Burma last. It would be so powerful, he said, if the president would just say their name. So when we spoke to the administration, we talked to key officials in the State Department, they said, oh, well, what's in a name? What's in a name? And so we started a campaign in which, an Instagram campaign. I gave this speech to some kids up in Maine. And they said, that's terrible, we're going to start an Instagram campaign. And everyone was holding a sign, and it said, Mr. President, just say their name. Just say their name. And this went from Falmouth High School to all over the world, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, until finally, at the end of this trip, an Associated Press reporter said there's something going on all over the internet that wants you to say the name Rohingya. Mr. President, will you say the name? And he said the name, and he said we need to stop the attacks that are going on against this community. So in big ways and in small ways. Let us recognize the horror, but let's also recognize the hope. And with our heads and our hearts and our action, let's save the Rohingya. Thank you.
We're doing okay with time. Before I call upon our next distinguished speaker, I do want to thank Lord Nazir Ahmed for coming here, because Lord Nazir will have to catch a flight, and then Lord Nazir will be leaving in a few minutes. So let's please thank Lord Nazir.